Hi there, my name's Leanne and I'm Conveyor Insurance Information Security Transformation Manager. It's my job to make sure that whatever we do with our information assets as a business and for our customers is as secure as possible. Information security is sometimes called cybersecurity, but we do more than just protect digital information, so it includes any type of information. And my role involves making sure that we're following best practices, so following rules and regulations for protecting against cyber attacks and breaches. I also need to make sure that everyone in the business has the knowledge and the tools they need in order to be able to protect ourselves. And that includes things like securing ourselves for our websites and for our apps, but also anywhere that we distribute information. So that's things like emails, collaboration tools like Slack and Teams. It's also really important for my role to keep on top with the latest security trends, the technological information trends, and make sure that I understand what is the latest threat to our business and can we protect against it? What can we put in place to make sure that we don't fall foul to the latest virus, for example, or the latest ransomware? And it's about understanding what context are we dealing with and how do we stop that from happening to us. Within the information security team, we also do a lot of testing of our products and services from a security perspective. So, for example, our apps and our websites have regular testing to see how they would cope against a real cyber attack. And this is called a pen test. Now, a pen tester involves getting in an ethical hacker, and an ethical hacker is someone who is legally allowed to hack into a system on permission of the company. And their job is to act like a real hacker would and see how far they could get into a system using the tools and processes that a hacker would normally. And the idea is that we need to see, are they able to get in? Are they able to change any data? Does our monitoring processes, so like our firewalls and things like that, does that stop them from getting any further? And if they are able to get in, what can they do while they're there? And once they've tried to get in, or if they have got in, they write a report for us to let us know what they did and how to fix it if they manage to get in. And it's really important that these tests are done continually because it enables us to make sure that our sites and apps are constantly secure. Because you could create something really secure with no vulnerabilities, but in a few weeks' time, you'll have a new vulnerability come out and you'll have to remediate against that because it's constantly changing. Think about, for example, how often your phone or your laptop asks you to do computer updates. That's usually one for functionality because new features and functions, but quite a lot of the time it's because new vulnerabilities are being discovered and your OS software is just trying to protect against that. So it's really important to keep on top of the testing there. Another important job is the monitoring of our systems and tools. So, for example, we're a bit like a human antivirus in the information security team. So we watch our networks to make sure that the traffic that's coming in and out of our business is legitimate. It should be the people who are authorized to do so. So on a typical week, we get hundreds of thousands of attack attempts from all over the world, from all different kinds of countries, to see if they can get into our system, and we need to stop those by putting our controls in place. We also need to make sure that data isn't going out in the wrong place. So, for example, we don't want our employees emailing customer data out to other sources or posting them elsewhere. So we need to block attempts when that happens as well. And particularly now that we're working remotely, we need to make sure that we actually are letting the right people in, because whereas before we had an office with one IP range, now everyone has their own individual IP ranges because they're working from home using their home Wi-Fi, for example. We need to make sure that the right people can still do the jobs they need to do. Occasionally we do also need to fix things in our team. And that's usually with things like if an employee, for example, clicks on a phishing email and that puts malware on their computer, or if they've navigated to a site that perhaps looks legitimate, put in their credentials and it turns out it's not, then that fake site will have their details. So we need to make sure that we can remediate those problems and fix them as quickly as possible so they don't cause any further damage. So why is this important for our business? Well, data is the new oil. There are very few businesses nowadays that information isn't one of their primary assets. It's an integral part of business. Data is made up of the information that we have about us as a business, but also our customers, and it allows us to create products and services that meet both needs. So it's important we protect them because they're our crown jewels. And the problem with not protecting them is that the damage that can be done in that failure of protection, if it's fallen into the wrong hands or if it's been altered, for example, is absolutely catastrophic. Catastrophic for us as a business, but catastrophic for our customers as well. The impact is massive if we don't protect these assets. And you see it every day in the news about companies getting hacked, and fines for such breaches, for example, like GDPR, can run into the millions. Currently it's 17.5 million, or 4% of your worldwide turnover, so millions and millions of pounds in fines if you don't protect people's information properly. And companies nowadays, because of these fines, are struggling to endure afterwards. So fewer and fewer companies can really recover once they've been hit by a large breach. And that's because it either bankrupts them because the fines are so high, but also the reputational damage. Never underestimate reputational damage in terms of information security, because once your customers have lost confidence that you can't look after their details sufficiently, they'll go elsewhere where they think their details can be secured. And because of that, you'll lose customers, and obviously that takes an impact on your profits. So you need to really consider information security if you want a nice, profitable business. So now more so than ever, it's really important for businesses to have a strong information security focus and make that an essential part of the business, not just a value add. Because good security is good for business and it's good for our customers. So with that in mind, there are two things I want you to consider for your insurance company. And that is the Information Security CIA Triad and authentication. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. The CIA Triad. In security, there is something called the CIA Triad, and that consists of 3 principles that guide us in our goals and objectives for securing our environment and our data. Now, the triad consists of confidentiality, availability, and integrity. So what are these? Well, confidentiality means that we're ensuring that the people who are allowed to have access to our systems do, and those that don't have the authority to have access to our systems are blocked from doing any damage and accessing the systems. So, for example, in your insurance company, you wouldn't want the building maintenance person to be able to access customer records like financial details. For integrity, for example, that means ensuring that the data has not been tampered with, and therefore it can be trusted, it's authentic, and it's correct. And this is really important because, for example, if you've got car insurance as a policy and you've never had an accident and you've never got any points in your license, you don't want someone then going into the system and saying that you've got 10 points on your license, and therefore when you come to make a claim it might get rejected, or when you go to renew it'll cost you a lot more. You want that information on you to be accurate, correct, and reliable. And it's very important from a business perspective that that's the case too. The final one is availability, and this means making sure that our systems are up and running and have reliable access. So it means that our staff are able to access the systems they need to do their job, but also our customers are able to access the website, for example. And an example of this is, say if you had home insurance with us and your house is just flooded. When you're calling us up to make a claim, you want to be able to know that our staff can access the systems so that they can deal with your issue as quickly as possible. These days there are a lot of attacks on websites, for example, which are aimed at actually bringing systems down and stop businesses from running efficiently. And it can be really costly both from a financial perspective, as in we're not taking any new payments, for example, or making new customers, but also reputational damage, because customers do get fed up if they can't access the services that they paid for, or if they want to actually investigate to see if that company's worth getting insurance with. So it's really important to make sure that your site is up and running, but also that your staff also have the services and tools they need to be able to do their job. Make sure those tools are up and running. If something bad happens from an information security perspective, then one or more of these CIA triad will be impacted. However, it's worth noting that information security is not just about protecting assets from bad people who want to do bad things. Information security is also there to protect against accidental or non-intentional mistakes. For example, if an employee accidentally deletes a whole customer database, that's an information security risk. Or natural disasters, for example. So if a flood takes out your offices and you can't access your systems anymore, that is an information security concern. Task 2. Authentication. People are our strongest defense in protecting our information assets. One of the most effective ways we can protect our information is by using strong authentication means. But what is authentication? Authentication is the process of determining whether someone is in fact who they say they are or claim to be. And it's a process of recognizing someone's identity. So when you log into a site and create a username and password, these elements are stored as identifiable to you. And it proves that you're allowed access to whatever you're logging into. But weak passwords or reused passwords and even data breaches means that just having a password is no longer good enough to protect your account. But there are things that you can do to protect yourself and make it harder for criminals to gain access to your account. So one of the first things to do is to have a long password. Criminals use programs in order to try and crack passwords. The shorter the password is, the easier it is to crack. The more characters and length you add to it, the harder it is. Always remember that criminals are always looking for the easiest way in. So they will always try and go for someone who has a weak or a short password and target those people rather than people with complex and long passwords that take years to break. However, you need to remember that long passwords are really hard to remember. And so a good way of creating a strong long password is to use things like free random words. So instead of using things like password 123 or your dog's name or your date of birth or anything like that, free random words, for example, plant, hospital, tiger, all joined up together, is something a lot easier to remember, and it actually makes it a lot longer and more difficult to crack. From a business perspective, we really need to encourage our customers and our staff to use strong passwords and avoid common used passwords. But there is a fine line between security and usability. As I say, long passwords are really difficult to remember, and we also don't want to annoy our customers or staff in asking them to remember, for example, a minimum of 30 characters for a password. Because if you say that the only passwords they can use is at least 30 characters long, then they might not even take a policy with us. Or, for example, they might write it down somewhere, and therefore it's no longer a secure password that's unique and known to them if they're writing it down so they could remember it. So my second tip for strong passwords is to use a password manager. And password managers work by they create the long and unique passwords for you, and they remember them for you. So all you have to do is remember one strong password that holds all these other ones in there for you. Tip 3 is don't reuse passwords. This is really important because you could have the longest password going and really secure, and you remember it every single time. But if your password's been involved in a data breach because, for example, the company has not had strong defenses in place and those passwords have been put on the web, then that's the equivalent of a weak password because it's out there and known. And what criminals do is that they gather all these breached passwords and they try them against other accounts. So if you've got that same password used elsewhere, they will try it against other accounts and potentially could get into other places. And this can cause havoc. So it's always a good idea to use unique passwords for every single site, regardless of how strong your password is. Tip 4 is enable multi-factor authentication, or it's sometimes known as two-factor authentication, on any site that offers it, as this adds an extra element of security. Now, two-factor authentication is usually sent to you via a code, or you can use it as a fingerprint, so biometrically. And this changes every few seconds if it's a code, and you enter it usually after you've entered your password. And it's often given via an app, but it can sometimes be seen as a form of a text message or occasionally email. Two-factor authentication via an app is the most strongest way to do it, because it usually means having to use a fingerprint to identify yourself, which is of course very unique to you and very difficult to alter or change. Text messages can be intercepted, as can emails, by motivated hackers, but it's still best to use something rather than nothing. So if you can't use a two-factor authentication app, do use text messaging or an email instead. However, apps are usually the most secure way of doing it. Two-factor authentication is also a really great early warning system, as they can let you know if someone actually has successfully used your password on a site, because an alert will come up and it'll say, I'm ready for my two-factor authentication code. And this happened to me recently, actually. My phone's two-factor authentication alerted me that my password was used on a website that I have an account with. So what I was able to do then, oh, right, that's not me logging in because I'm out walking the dog. I came home and logged into my account and changed the password. So the two-factor authentication stopped that person from being able to get in because they didn't have that code to get to the second level of security. So I was able to avoid that hacker going into my account and probably purchasing items from my account. So it kept me safe because of that extra level of security. So why is it important for business though to have good authentication? Well, you want to encourage your customers to have good password and enable two-factor authentication to prevent them from getting hacked or for having their details compromised. And we also want this for the same for our staff who are logging into our system, because particularly for our staff, for example, we don't want people logging into, say, the administration pool's email address, because then they can able to go through our system and get to actually higher access privileges and access our private systems and do way more damage and impact things like the confidentiality, the integrity and availability of our system, all from a weak password. It really is the easiest way to get into a system, and it's the thing we need to spend more time protecting.